I went through years of therapy after struggling with suicidal depression. If you can attach your motivation to a purpose rather than a product, that is what kept me going, with an ultimate goal of improving 1 million lives. How do I jump in and start building this? And do we see that this is actually moving the dial on mental health? I would even say that that moment was better for me than the exit that we had. I framed the bank transfer notification that came through. Goodness, it's a life-changing amount of money. The US were much more innovative. And how does this technology give me a competitive edge? That was a big another blow for me.
Good morning and welcome to our podcast. I'd like to welcome you, Sean Ruane, founder and owner of Mind Data. Perhaps introduce yourself a little bit, tell us about Mind Data and the platform that it is.
Yeah, with pleasure. So thank you for having me here. So Mind Data is a platform that exists to ethically use artificial intelligence and technology to improve mental health outcomes. I'm personally on a life's mission to improve the mental health of 1 million people around the world. And so Mind Data was my opportunity to create a business with hopefully cool technology to speak towards that life's mission. And I'm sure we'll get into a bit more detail about both of those angles, but in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Right. How long have you been running the business?
2.5 years now.
Right. And what does that actually mean then? What is the platform doing?
Mm-hmm. So it's actually gone through multiple different iterations, actually. So probably the best way to describe it is how I started it, actually.
Right. Okay, take us through that.
Yeah, sure. So I went through years of therapy after struggling with suicidal depression whilst I was at university, just down the road at Buckingham, actually, not far from here. And there were a couple of areas that I wanted to improve when it came to my experience with therapy. The first was this idea of recency bias. I had to go into a room and remember a week or 2 weeks worth of information. And that was compounded by my therapist having also no idea what I'd been through. So we have a precious 50 minutes to get through some heavy topics. And a chunk of that is me trying to download thoughts. So my first version of Mind Data was a digital journal where I could track in the moment what I was feeling and what I was thinking. And I had these insights shared with my therapist. So I could reduce the reliance on my memory. And also my therapist could say, Sean, good to see you. I know you've had a bad week. Should we talk about what happened on Thursday? So that was the first leapfrog into using technology to solve kind of a human experience with therapy. That was the first version of Mind Data.
That's amazing. So your therapist could plan better for the sessions, and the information you provided was more accurate perhaps than recalling.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's very true. I think that when your memory distorts things, so certainly if you happen to have a 2-week gap, and bearing in mind you're not of sound mind, shall we say, I was going through a really rough time. So we were kind of just I was throwing things out there, hoping something would then catch and we'd just discuss it. So one of the other negative effects that I had from that was I realized that maybe most sessions I wasn't actually talking about the most important thing. It just happened to be something that I maybe remembered more clearly. So that was my goal, to be able to have more effective therapy conversations rather than a therapeutic conversation. You talk about anything that comes off the top of your head and it's therapeutic. It's great, it feels good for an hour. But when you're really struggling, you want to make meaningful progress. So you want to be able to be speaking about the most important thing. So that was the original goal of that digital journal.
And so what is the scale of the issue, or the kind of size of market that you feel this could, as you said, 1 million, it's quite a big number, but I guess the reality is that there's so many people affected by this kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. 1 million, if there's one bit of feedback that I've had from would-be investors, mentors, is that actually 1 million is a very small number. When you're looking to create a technology business, the amount of people said, why not 1 billion? Genuinely, why only 1 million? Why have you capped it at such a small amount? And we know that, certainly with young men, it's, one in 3 men, I think, struggle with suicidal depression. So it is an enormous problem just in the UK, let alone when we expand that out worldwide. The reason for me choosing 1 million was I chose that number when I was a student. And I saw this inspiring TEDx talk, and he said that his purpose was greater than his circumstances. And I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty good way of framing my life post-depression. So I was like, well, let me choose a lofty goal of 1 million lives. And then when I get to 1 million, maybe I'd make it 10 million, for example. So that actually explains why. And really, you're quite right. It doesn't actually scratch the surface on the actual mental health problem around the world. And there are so many different ways of tackling that. And, mind data today doesn't quite look the same as this first situation that we're talking about. And I'm sure we'll come on to that. But the problem is enormous around the world.
How did you start? I mean, were you literally sitting like in your student room thinking, okay, I'm going to do this, I've got a bit of savings, or mum and dad can give me some money, or just take us back to the very early days? I mean, proper startup phase.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually there is a gap between me graduating university and starting Mind Data, and that will hopefully fill in a bit of this gap here. So after I graduated in December of 2016, I actually I was on the early team of an HR technology company.
Right.
Nothing to do with mental health. I was introduced by a visiting lecturer who had invested into these two guys that started it. And I was very fortunate to have been introduced to them and joined. I was their employee number one. And so it was called Clear Review, and we did employee performance development, effectively, kind of a cousin of wellbeing and engagement, shall we say. And we grew that company from the three of us all the way through to an exit 3 years ago now. And I stayed on as a director of the acquiring company who bought us. And it was during that time that I then started to say, look, I've got a little bit of money from the exit. Now I should really lean into maybe doing something meaningful other than what was I doing? The odd Instagram post, for example. I tried to write a book and I got to page 1 and I thought, I'm not an author. So I thought there's got to be a better way of doing this. And, I've done technology startups throughout my teenage years and failed a lot and tried a lot, had some success with Clear Review. And I thought, okay, this sounds like a good Venn diagram, technology and innovation and mental health. And if I could bring those together, that seems like a really worthwhile but also enjoyable pursuit for me personally of being able to leverage technology to improve human mental health effectively. So that's what happened in the interim between graduating and Mind Data.
So did you put together a business plan, or did you just sort of have one of these think bubble moments, I'm going to do that, and just launch straight into it?
Yeah, it was far more of the innovation, jump head first, not really much of a business plan per se. I started actually by creating like an AI chatbot, a therapist in your pocket. That was my original idea, that was called Onyx Mind at the time.
Right.
And I realized that actually this was the wrong direction for me, because I look back at my experience with therapists and I thought it's a therapeutic human relationship that really saved my life. And I don't believe that my angle on this was to replace the human element of it.
Right.
So I then looked back at my experiences, as I've mentioned earlier, and thought, well, how can I use technology as a tool to actually improve the conversation? So my first thing was, how do I build this? It wasn't the business plan. It wasn't market research initially. It was, I've got an idea. I've never been introduced to anything that solved this. If there is something out there, it's not mainstream. My 4 or 5 therapists that I've had have never mentioned anything like this. So how do I jump in and start building this? And that was my first foray into it. Just start building in the evenings and weekends.
And what did that look like then, that start building? Because I think a lot of people have an idea, but, and a lot of those ideas just go nowhere because no one knows where to start or, how to do it. So how did you, in those very early stages, build that?
I'm not an engineer or developer, actually. So that was the first problem. I've got this idea of a technology, but I can't build the thing. And I was very lucky that our product director, Ali, he had moved on after the exit and started building his own startup, and he showed me what he was building. It's called Knowledge Bank at the time, or Answer Bank. And it was this brilliant platform that could kind of go through all of your files, documents, conversations within a company and find an answer for you. When is that due date, or what does that look, whatever it may be, it would just scour those. And I said to Ali, this is amazing. How did you build this? And he introduced me to a platform called bubble.io, which is a low-code platform. So if you have an idea, as long as you have a good understanding of technology without maybe being able to code it, you can drag and drop and write single lines of code or whatever it may be, a visual designer, if you will. And that was my gateway of like, I think I can do this without necessarily paying a developer to do this. This can really get me from 0 to 1. So I used bubble.io. That was my first version.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I mean, obviously it's benefited you, but for people generally. So if I've got an idea about a product I want to launch, are we talking about something that has to be an app or a platform, or is it just for any kind of idea at all?
Well, this is primarily a web app or app or a platform. This is primarily a technology-based website, effectively.
And it's what, bubble.io?
Bubble.io, yeah, Bubble.io, bubble.io. Right. Brilliant for creating minimal viable products. Amazing, because you want to be able to test a hypothesis as quickly and as cheaply as possible, and for a very low monthly fee of £30, I managed to create this fully working platform, and so it was a web app. I don't know if they've since progressed, well, maybe you can deploy that to a native app. I never went down that route. We just did a web app effectively. But I agree. I think that for any would-be entrepreneurs that may be thinking, I've got this really good innovative idea, I don't have £25,000 to pay for an engineering firm to build this. There are lots of other similar platforms. If Bubble.io isn't for them, search low code or no code platforms. There are a plethora out there, and they really help the non-engineering founders go from 0 to 1.
That's quite incredible, really.
Yeah.
And you own the platform that you've created.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not entirely sure about the IP and the ins and outs of it. I can talk about this actually now, because the platform that we've got at Mind Data now isn't actually hosted on Bubble. Yeah. There was an issue with Bubble where it was around data privacy and security. So as the creator of the platform, I could go into the database and I could see journal entries, for example. Now that worked, testing the hypothesis, things like that. But I realized that if I was to commercialize this and really run with it, that's not correct. That's not GDPR compliant. It's not ethically, compliant. I shouldn't be able to do that even if I wanted to. So the first person I brought on was from Clearview again, Jan Zambrini. He was the director of privacy, and so I brought him on as director of information ethics and said, look, Jan, I need you to work with me to build privacy by design. We're not going to cut it on Bubble.io. We've test the hypothesis, but the first question people are going to rightly ask is how secure is it? How is it encrypted, for example? And this minimal viable product is not going to cut it. So that's when we did outsource the proper build. But we could lean into it with more confidence because we knew that the idea worked. But also it really circumnavigated. This is another bit for would-be founders. A big part of the costs of engineering is the wireframing, it's the ideation, it's the how does this work? What if this happens? It's a big part of it. Whereas I did give the minimal viable product to this team and said, this is it. And if you forget your password, this is what happens. If they delete the account, this is what happens. And so that really helped save a lot of time and money, because I had the wireframe there. It was just properly code this, if you will. So another benefit I would say to would-be founders to the MVP route.
That's very impressive, actually.
Yeah.
I'd not heard of it. Were you familiar with that?
No, I hadn't. But I had actually heard an investor on a panel recently, and he was saying that actually with the technology that we have available today, it's much easier for founders to get to that MVP and present something and prove some traction than it would have been 10, 20 years ago when we didn't have these tools. So it's interesting to hear from you the other side as the founder who has actually built it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask actually, so you did reference that you had some learnings when you joined like different startups and the kind of bit between university and starting Mind Data.
Yes.
What were some of the key learnings that you then took when you did start Mind Data and kind of implemented?
The first thing was, and I learned this from Stuart Hearn, who was the CEO and founder of Clearview, and he's now a lead investor and mentor for me. So we've still got a great relationship, which is wonderful. He was an excellent leader. And so number one was culture. You can hire brilliant people, but if they don't fit the culture, they will do more destruction. That was really important for us, and setting out what the common attributes of the founding team were, and saying what do we think are our best traits that we want to kind of mimic across the company? What do we think that works amongst us? And what guardrails do we put in place? So how do we ensure that we don't hire bad people or rude people, disrespectful people, whatever it may be? But the other thing was, I learned from Stuart and Jan is do it right first time. And when I say right, I don't mean necessarily skip out an ideation phase or an iterative approach, but if you need security measures in place, do it properly. Don't circumnavigate those, because they will come and bite you later on. You really need to do those things correctly and ethically. And so that for me made it much easier when we decided to go from MVP to version 1 of let's build this properly. It's kind of like build an iceberg. Most of it is the unsexy thing. It's beneath the surface, and it's all the data security and how to processes. And I knew that whatever we built in the future, if we built it on a good foundation, that will always pay dividends. It will always do that. I was chief commercial officer, so at Clear Review. So I had a lot of these conversations with our existing or new customers. If I joined sales calls, for example, existing customers, it's not a question of if something will go wrong, it is when. Something will go wrong. There'll be something that's an issue. And you want to be able to lean into those conversations and say, we did everything in genuinely good faith. We've got the processes documented. We can really lean. There's a learning here, but actually the thing that went wrong wasn't because of negligence. It wasn't because we cut a corner because we're a startup and, I didn't want to have that kind of startup excuse. So they were the two main things that I took from my experience at Clear Review into Mind Data.
And I think something you've mentioned a few times now about ethical AI is really interesting, because we've obviously spoken to an AI expert on the podcast, and you hear a lot about AI, and there's this debate about kind of good versus evil, different uses for AI. So when you talk about ethical AI, firstly, what do you mean, and why do you think that's so important?
Well, I think firstly it's important because AI is a catch-all term. It's a bit like using the word technology. What do you actually mean by technology? It's such an all-encompassing term. But ultimately, it is a tool to be leveraged by people, like electricity. You can light a room, or you can kill somebody with it. It's not innately good or bad. I don't think, anyway, from my view. It's how you use it, in which context, and which guardrails you put in place for it. And so when I talk about ethical use, I think the first thing that we've done is try to slow the rate of progress with how we use AI. That for us is really important, because I want to be able to say at every stage of our development, this is exactly how and why we use AI. This is the outcomes that we hope. And we're comfortable at this foundation. Now we're ready to progress on and add some more to it. I've spoken to a lot of other founders that have kind of ChatGPT wrappers or whatever it may be on their platforms. And they just, I think they use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And it's just, hey, we'll just run with generative AI and it can do amazing things. Brilliant. I think as a productivity side or an output, it's brilliant. But when it comes to mental health, it is really important to be able to just walk before you can run. And so at every phase, we make sure that it's secure, it's doing the right thing. And we want to make sure that it's not running off in a generative perspective, coming up with summaries or ideas or diagnoses that we weren't aware of, because that's not what we need it to be doing. I think we will get to the point where we use generative AI, that we can become more predictive in mental health patterns. That's where I'd like us to be. But it's going to be a medium paced journey to get there, because I want to be able to talk to our customers, our investors, and look them in the eye to say, this is exactly the guardrails that we've put in place at every stage. And I think that's what I mean as a founder, as an ethical use of AI. Am I using it in an ethical and moral way, rather than just putting a Ferrari engine into something because it sounds good, it will sell, it looks good on a website, investors are throwing money at AI, fine, that's something, but we want to be able to make sure that it's not doing harm in the first place. That's how I view the usage of AI as a tool.
I wanted to ask you about how you got your first customers. Because obviously you've put a lot of work into the concept, into developing it, bringing people on board, write the code, the ethical element, the data privacy, those are great. But then you need the commercial side, and as you say, you were a chief commercial officer. So how did you get your first customers?
So my first users, shall we say, rather than customers, were part of the bubble. They were the MVP. So I kind of deployed that amongst real therapists. Say, look, does this genuinely work? Because I think it works. I think it'll be good, but you don't want to have founders hubris, and you don't want to have, you have a founder's hypothesis. I built A, I think X. Does X actually deliver, for example? And thankfully, we had some great case studies. It really worked. Now, the way I got those on board was just Instagram, word of mouth, asking people if they'd be willing to try it. A lot of therapists said no, actually, and we'll come on to the commercialization of this. Therapists do not use mind data anymore. That was a dead end for me, and I'll talk about my experiences there about the commercialization. The next group that we targeted were universities, incredibly risk adverse, and I don't fully believe them, but budget poor. We'll take that with a pinch of salt. But again, that was another dead end. My first actually paying customer was a rehabilitation clinic that specialised in exclusively working with women recovering from eating disorders.
Right.
They're based in Portugal, based in London, a wonderful business. And that was quite a long sales cycle, actually. We initially made contact about 6 months prior, and then they came back and, we finally found our way. But building relationships, and I think that trying to show your workings, if you will, was really important in this very sensitive, risk-adverse world of using technology with my patients, my clients. There might be kind of odds here. And so I think that kind of helping to bridge that gap and smooth over those cracks and say, look under the hood, if you will. We're happy to show you everything, how it works. You can test it. That was really important. So the path to our first customer was paved with lots of failed, not just, dead deals, dead industries, dead sectors that just did not work. That was a huge learning for me. And I had to limp along for a long time as a startup, self-funding myself to stay alive, pay the mortgage, to get to that point.
In retrospect, do you think that if you'd had an opportunity to do market research first, would you have still headed down this road? Or would you have tried an alternative approach or done something different completely? Yeah,
I think that market research would definitely have helped. I did a degree of market research. It's a bit of a yes and no answer, because I did. My challenge and my feedback to other founders, and I wish I'd learned this quicker, was naturally when you build something innovative or new, you will naturally gravitate and pull towards the innovators within that market. And they will give you great feedback. They're the ones willing to try it. They'll probably be more open to change management and adopting this new technology. So I think that creates a false positive, because I thought, we're in here. 85% of people that have tried this love it. I expanded that out across the therapy market and was like, hang on, we're in here. But actually, when you look at the bell curve of distribution, you get the middle majority and maybe the laggards, if you will, that make up the vast majority of a particular market. So I quickly realized, hang on, I've built a technology that may only be applicable to 5% of a market, because not everybody's an innovator or an adopter of new technology. That was my biggest lesson. And I think that if I had the opportunity, I wish I had tried to roll it out across the bell curve and to get more of an idea. It's easier said than done, because if they're not open to trying new things, you can't force it. So naturally, so it is a bit of a double-edged sword. But nonetheless, that was my biggest learning.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So you got your first customer, which must be very nice. Not just from the revenue perspective, but it means, right, there's a commercial process here that I can build on.
Yeah.
Given that, as you say, you might be attracting 5% of the market initially. What did you do next to try and build a customer base of more than one?
Yes. So firstly, I framed the bank transfer notification when it came through. It was in my desk at home. And it was only a small amount, less than £1,000. But I was like, oh my goodness, I could create something and someone paid for it. This is the absolute high that an entrepreneur looks for. I would even say that moment was better for me than the exit that we had. When the money came through after the exit, it was like, oh my goodness, it's a life-changing amount of money. The customer that was paying, that was the high. There was something about that. It's like crack cocaine for an entrepreneur. That's why we do it, because it's quite masochistic what we do. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
We spend our lives in doubt and pain and struggling and all of this. So when that high comes in, it's the absolute high. So I would say my experience of getting that was amazing. This next bit talks about where we are today, about the progression of our progress. So again, when we stumbled on our first paying customer and thought, actually, this was inbound. This is amazing. We could have an opportunity with clinics. This is brilliant. One of the, so let me kind of just describe the three main layers of mind data by this point. So we've got the digital journal for end users, students, patients, whoever they are, to track how they're feeling. We've got that middle layer that coaches or therapists can log into and see the insights to better prepare. And then in the background, we'd since then built an aggregated dashboard. So what we do is we use a form of AI, statistical analysis, to analyze the journal entries. And we take the insights from these journal entries and the demographic tags of those individuals and aggregate them onto a dashboard. So the idea here is that we can empower organizations with real-time insights that can be filtered by different subcategorizations. So what a white male identifying employee is struggling with this month is going to be largely different to a minority female identifying employee. So we should use data to decide the interventions we're doing rather than a one size fits all. And when we've intervened and done workshops, whatever it may be, hired a new therapist, do we see the return on investment? Do we see that this is actually moving the dial on mental health? And that was the purpose of this aggregated dashboard. And this is exactly was really appealing to this first clinic, because they said, look, we're an innovative new approach here. In the future, we want to roll out our services to organizations, maybe the NHS, but we already know that we will need quantifiable data on the impact of what we're doing. We need to move beyond case studies. And Sally had a great experience. That's something, but we need to be able to prove this over time and see progress.
Yeah.
That was the very appealing thing. The challenge we had when we were contacting a multitude of other clinics was, we love this, absolutely, but we need to go upstream. Where does the data start, Sean? Great news. Digital journal. We know the benefits of journaling. People would switch off. That was what I would call a lean away moment, where they're like, we can't get people to, do their therapy homework. They don't journal in paper diaries. They're not going to reliably journal their thoughts, Sean. We just can't force them to do it. So unfortunately, your whole data flow falls down because end users aren't going to engage. That was a big another blow for me. Of like, oh my goodness, so we're so far away. And I'll talk in a second about what we then did, but that was an enormous blocker for universities and clinics, the journaling, unfortunately.
As a former patient yourself, did you recognize that as a block?
Me personally, I didn't so much. I journaled and I loved journaling. So I was journal centric, if you will. So I was a little bit blind to it.
Right.
I also had really supportive therapists personally, but also the innovators that had used it. So it worked well because I, as an individual, or the individuals that journaled, had a feedback loop. So they had clarification that what they were doing was correct, because the therapist would say, I've read your journals, I've seen your insights, let's talk about it. So there was this kind of gratification loop of, okay, great, I should keep doing this. But the moment that you have an individual that doesn't journal reliably, or they begin to journal, but after 3 weeks, they realize my therapist isn't really reading these, so maybe I won't. It really requires two individuals, these stakeholders, to actively engage with this for the loop to work. And so it's actually over-reliant on both of these flawed humans, as we all are, to sustain habits. So I quickly started to learn that actually humans are entirely on a spectrum. So not only did I realize that 5% of therapists would be going above and beyond to try to do more for their clients, let's say, by reading these, I also realized that maybe only 30% of individuals would reliably journal in any type of consistent way. So quickly I started to realize this innovative idea that on paper works, in practice, I'm not sure this is going to work at scale. And that was a real fall for me.
And how did you deal with that?
Well, personally, not very well. I had lots of deep anxiety, stress. I was very, very kind of awake at 4 a.m. with sweats, because I think I've put a lot of money into this, and it wouldn't financially ruin me necessarily, but it would wipe out all of the benefits of the exit, and I'd be hitting reset. And I think, what was that? Was that worth it? Probably not. Yeah. But also the embarrassment. I think one thing that I've really struggled with is, yes, people say fail quickly, and hey, at least you gave it a go, you'll never regret. But you think, but when you're in the cesspit of LinkedIn and you're saying, just sold my business, just signed another customer, hockey stick growth, and you think, that's not happening for me. I'm a real failure. I'm so embarrassed socially here, but also with my friends and family. We had lots of celebrations of selling Clear Review and going through that, buying a house, and Sean's a success, quote unquote, I use that term loosely, a success. And, you know, going through that and being the entrepreneur, the businessman in the family or friendship group. And then the idea of then saying, oh, you're a bit of a has-been, aren't you? You tried that and you failed. And that still weighs on me enormously to this day, because you're only one day away from it failing. You never know. There's nothing guaranteed in business. So personally, I really struggled with this idea of it just crumbling around me. Professionally, this is the other bit of advice I would give to founders. If you can attach your motivation to a purpose rather than a product, that is what kept me going and has kept me going now. I don't care genuinely what the platform looks like. I don't care what it does necessarily, as long as it's an ethical use of cool technology that I enjoy using, that will positively improve the experiences of people and their mental health, with an ultimate goal of improving 1 million lives. That way you can then say, look, that didn't work, drop the journal. That did work, invest more there, change this, delete this, whatever it may be. And I think in those very, very, very early days, I was actually quite wedded and quite resistant to the therapist that was saying, I'll never read journal entries, Sean, not interested. And I would push against them, say, well, it doesn't sound like a very good therapist. You know, you should, you know, this improves patient outcomes. Why wouldn't you do this? And I was kind of pushing against them. And after a while, you just have to realize there's no win there. Maybe you win an argument, or not that I haven't had an argument, but maybe you win a conversation, but they're never going to pay for it. So it's a loss anyway. So professionally pivoting, consistently pivoting, and just following the breadcrumbs and the crumbs of conversations. Which were the lean in moments? Which were the lean out moments? When people say, that's interesting, tell me more about that. How does that work? And the lean out moments of, so you're having, you know, they're having to journal, are they? That starts to give you kind of a canary down the mine of, okay, the value is leaning in this part. It ended up being in our AI analytics side of things, rather than the sharp end of, you know, patient facing tools, if you will.
Did you notice kind of different attitudes towards technology and adoption across different demographics of users? So different generations or different locations, backgrounds, that kind of thing?
Definitely. So firstly, age demographic, unsurprisingly, for therapists and individuals. I found that they were very much more at home with technology. They weren't so worried about it. And certainly when you had younger therapists, not only in their personal lives did they, millennials, let's say, they grew up with technology, but also they maybe weren't as far into their career where they think, well, I've done something for 35 years, I'm having to undo this. It's also a benefit. If you don't have to have that change management of stripping something away and replacing it, that was positive. So age on both the therapist and individual were really important. Geography was a big part. The people I spoke to in the US, their question was more aligned with why your technology. The UK side of things was why technology. That was a big nuance for me. That was a difference.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I found that generally speaking, the UK, whether universities, you know, their wellbeing teams or individuals, much more conservative, much more risk adverse. Yeah. The US were much more innovative. And how does this technology give me a competitive edge? Why is yours instead of X? So age and geography, they were two big things that I found when it came to this.
Gender bias at all, is there anywhere?
Not actually, no, not really. No. On the patient side of things, I would say the journaling was disproportionately leaning towards women, I would say, if anything. But it's still a relative split overall on the other, like stakeholders, like therapists, for example. Yeah. Maybe there was a degree of gender split when it came to the actual journaling. I think men generally find it harder. I think at least women are more comfortable, if I stereotype, talking about their emotions. Men struggle on average to talk about it, let alone journal it. So there probably a degree of that slightly, but nothing that was outstanding of, okay, this is only going to work with women. Not really.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're actually, on the US-UK point, you're not the first person to say there is this cultural difference. So someone else, thinking of John Dixon was saying about his kind of investment journey and the opportunity out in the US being different because of that different perception of just less risk averse.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're considering going for a seed round. We've closed our pre-seed round last year, considering doing a seed round. I think that I would lean towards looking for American US investors rather than UK or European investors, I would say, purely based on my experiences with conversations. I mean, there's no proof that it's not empirical or quantifiable data to back that up from my experiences. But certainly there does seem a little bit more of a culture of innovation, a bit more of a can-do attitude. Let's do it and figure it out. The conversations I've had with European or UK-based investors, even at angel level, were much more around risk aversion. My experience was that was the, rather than seeing it as, let's just figure this out. It was very much like, well, what are the pitfalls? What are the more conversations around what are your competitors doing? Rather than the US were very much like, this seems really cool. How do we support you? How do we continue to build this? So but again, I can only speak from my experience, but I think that I would lean towards the US.
Well, we've certainly seen with our guests on these podcasts, we've seen that getting funding in this country, whether it's a form of loan finance, debt finance, equity, is really hard. The SME sector in particular struggles. And there is, certainly in the UK, there's an aversion to risk, which makes it very hard for businesses like yours. And it's interesting to hear what you about the US. My experience of US investors is they are much more gung-ho. They're a bit more demanding as well in terms of what they want, but it is easier, not easy, but it's easier to get investment. So that makes a lot of sense what you say.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And actually, just to kind of elaborate on that point as well, I won't name the university just yet, just in case something just happened, but potentially working with a university to develop more AI capabilities and seek grant funding through a KTP, a knowledge transfer partnership, for those who don't know. And we were actually denied. And it's because we were too young. As a company, which felt really counterintuitive. That was one of the bits of feedback. Apparently, our combination of our age and our funding we were too underfunded and too young, so the KTP didn't come off. And that was a good example of, hang on, surely companies like mine are the ones that should be doing this. Exactly, we need it the most, you know. So I think that for young companies, even entrepreneurs, I've got this crazy idea. I don't know how it would actually work, but it'd be amazing if you could have some kind of support on a monthly basis to support entrepreneurs and their personal finances. That would be incredible. I'd happily jump through multiple hoops of weekly conversations with an advisor or a mentor, or auditing my accounts to ensure that I'm genuinely building a genuine business, working on it every day. I've invested X or Y, but in return, the government give me a degree a month just to help keep me alive and support future entrepreneurs. And maybe in exchange, I'd have higher tax rates, for example, until I paid that debt back, for example. Yeah, I'd happily do that. But I do wonder the amount of people that say, I've got a really good idea, but I can't afford to jump. And I just think, the amount of lost ideas that must go because, well, I need to live, I need a minimum amount. A great idea. I don't know how it would work economically, but
it's very tough. I think
it's a repeated theme, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of advice, especially if you say like on LinkedIn and online, people say, if you've got a dream, just go for it. And it does feel like if you've got children or a mortgage or, responsibilities, it's actually very difficult to do that, even if the idea is very good.
Yeah. And a lot of entrepreneurs are effectively doing a day job to pay the mortgage and feed the family, and in the evenings and weekends they're doing the other one. And making that work and transitioning is very, very tough indeed. So it's amazing. So what point are you at now in your business? Obviously, if you're looking for a seeding round, you've presumably got a reasonable client base that you're hoping obviously will grow. But you want to grow the whole product range, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. So where we're at the moment is we had a lot of self-reflections at the end of last year of where we are as a business, and struggling to find real traction commercially and real growth, bits and pieces here and there, and paid pilots, paid customers here and there, but nothing meaningful. It wasn't really taking off. And we did an audit of all of the sales conversations, demos and everything like that. And we literally made an Excel spreadsheet of lean in, lean out moments, when were people leaning out and leaning in? And we realized that actually it was the analytics piece that people were really interested in. It's how do we get more data and insights on mental health? And so we then said, okay, well, what if we were to turn Mind Data into an API first Google Analytics for mental health engine.
Right.
What if we were to strip away the journal, strip away the therapist portal, and just say, look, we analyze your data that you send in, and we will show you aggregated insights on mental health trends. That is the direction that we're traveling in now. And actually, already this year, we've got 3 or 4 commercial conversations around partnering with other technology providers to say, look, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You've got a brilliant platform. You've got great engagement rates of your athlete mental performance, for example, or employee mental health, whatever it may be. Let us be the invisible white labeled engine on the back end to show aggregated mental health data, insights, trends, so that you can then back to your customers, prove impact, show the value you're delivering. One of the things that we're seeing at the moment is a lot of technology platforms will have engagement data, number of therapy sessions had, videos consumed, minutes logged in. Great, they're leading indicators. But by themselves, they don't necessarily prove that things are getting better. So what? Someone's had 5 therapy sessions. Great. They can't get better if they're not having therapy sessions, but are they getting better? Is it working? And so what we're planning on doing is filling the gap here and saying, look, let us be your analytics partner, and we will show you mental health trends and insights on the uses or the users that you're having, and we will be your partner in the back end. And maybe, everyday Joe on the street wouldn't know mind data exists, and that's fine. We're happy to sit in the background. But I think that's where our strength lies. That's where our value is. And that's the path we're on now, where we're also turning it into an API first engine, but also expanding out the capabilities of the AI, because instead of spreading our investment over 3 use cases, we can now over-invest, over-index into the analytics piece and be the UK's leading mental health insights platform. That's where I think we will be. That's what I'd like to do. And in the long term, it lays a clearer path to an acquisition in the future. I think it's far more likely that a bigger mental health platform or technology provider would say, this is good technology, we should just bring this in-house, rather than we are a platform that covers the whole spectrum, if you will. This makes more sense for that path to not only commercialization and growth, but also at some point an acquisition that will help expand our impact as being part of a larger company. So that's where we will be heading this year, and that will be hopefully part of that seed round, which a big part of it will be, we've got commitment here, this is what we need, but we need to do X, Y, Z here. Can we use investment to accelerate this rate of change to support these new commercial opportunities?
Okay, so I'm trying to visualize kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
So is it that you'd have a business that's using your platform to see kind of a dashboard or see the data? Would that data be only their data, or would you be anonymizing and presenting a full kind of data set from other sources as well?
Probably both. So firstly, you're absolutely right. If we imagine company A uses platform X, we would partner with platform X. And so we would analyze the interactions, the data, the survey responses that the employees are giving to this platform. So if we imagine something like BetterHelp, I don't know, for example, or whatever it may be, we can analyze the data that's going into this platform and showing platform X a dashboard. And they may want to then white label that and show in turn that back to the HR team, for example, at company there. So that's that we're much more of a B2B now rather than a B2C, shows or a B2B2C. So much more of a B2B approach here. That's what we'd be doing. And I think the other 2 parts that we would do is, I think there is a good use case for being able to kind of provide benchmark data. If we're straddling different industries, thousands, hundreds of thousands of users, I think benchmarking data is really useful. Certainly if you've got a company that's using Mind data for the first time, so well, actually we can leapfrog you kind of 2 years based on data, based on estimates. So we're likely, if you have a white male identifying employee that works in sales, it's likely statistically that they will struggle with financial anxiety in the first 3 months, for example. So bake that into your onboarding, for example. Let's get ahead of mental health issues before they occur. We're a big believer of, if you can be proactive instead of reactive, that's where the money's at, and when I mean money, I don't mean commercial, I mean mental money. That's really where the ethical wins are. If you can prevent someone getting sick, that's far better. I think it's a ratio of 5 to 1. for every £1 spent on a proactive intervention to prevent burnout, it's the equivalent of £5 spent on if someone is experiencing burnout and they need therapy, they need time off. So it's an incredible ratio of, if you can get ahead of a problem rather than solving a problem.
That's quite an important statistic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really useful data for any business person.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It makes financial sense.
Yeah. And whether it relates purely to mental health or just their health generally. Yeah. If you invest £1, you're going to save yourself £5 effectively, and multiply that out by staff and other numbers, and those are big numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because when you think about it, if you do think of what would it have looked like to prevent burnout happening, it may have been that Wednesday off. It may have been giving them 2 hours 3 times a week to pick their kids up from school, for example. Whatever it may be, right? Yeah. It may be a coaching session once a month. But you compare that to when someone says, I am really unwell, I'm going to need 3 to 6 months off now, for example. Whatever it may be, it's quite easy when you play it out in practical terms. Think, well, it does make sense to have done things, upstream.
Yeah, and I guess from a kind of productivity kind of output, when you're feeling good, you must be more productive, and
I mean, there'll be interesting data as well, won't there, around, because obviously since COVID, the whole nature of work, do you work from home, do you work in an office, is it hybrid? And there's a lot of talk in the press now about people's mental health, and it would be great to get, a dashboard on that and understand what is the true picture and what is better for the employee.
I totally agree with that. And actually, because we sold just as COVID started, and we were employee performance development, and we just started to bridge into engagement as well with MindData as well, I have quite a good lens on that. And actually, the thing that we found was treat employees how they want to be treated was the overarching thing. This idea of work from home is objectively better. Maybe not. Maybe if you've got 3 children at home that are all toddlers and it's very stressful and you can't work in peace, maybe working from home isn't so good. Conversely, 5 days a week in the office where you're not spending time with your children, you're spending 2 hours a day commuting, maybe not so good either. So the one thing we found was ask people what they want, and where you can deliver on what they require. And generally speaking, that averaged out to some type of hybrid approach, which is probably unsurprising. But I think that's really important to be able to get ahead of it. And to your point, if we could use, MindData dashboard and not only filter by demographic, but also maybe filter by working practices. Do we see disproportionately high rates of well-being across hybrid workers or home workers versus commuters? Maybe, perhaps, but my view would be, if you give people autonomy, you would like to imagine those well-being rates would probably balance out. They'd all be the same, because commuting isn't objectively bad. Maybe that's a benefit to those people. If I love commuting, reading my book on the train is a great hour for me. That boosts my well-being, for example. So you would like to imagine that the well-being rates would be similar across those 3, for example, but it would still be really interesting. The other thing I was just going to say, just to your point, not only benchmarking data, but also what we want to be able to do is bring in big data or unstructured data into that. So it could be weather patterns, it could be sentiment of news feeds. There are a whole host of other leading subconscious factors. So what we want to be able to do is, when we become and I do fully believe this, I hope this doesn't sound egotistical, I think we will be the UK's leading mental health insights platform. That's exactly where I'd want us to be. And I would love to be able to bring in this big data and overlay it with the subjective self-reporting data and say, did you know, this is the sentence I would love to be able to do, did you know that if you are a minority female identifying employee under 35 that works in marketing during the month of January, and if there's a negative news sentiment, there's a war broken out, global politics, here are the top 3 drivers for lower mental health for that person. So get ahead of it, for example. That type of insight is something that we can do with data and insights. We certainly can do with more generative AI, because I think that Gen AI will be able to pick up subconscious cues as well that maybe we're not even consciously reporting on. One thing that we were exploring when we had the journal were something that I think banks leverage. One was the pressure on the keyboard when you're typing. So how hard are you pressing? Does that indicate some subconscious stress? Rhythms. So I think from the banking perspective, they'll identify with the accelerometer, are you left or right-handed? Slightly. So even if you type in the right password, it's like this person's typing it with a left, bias, if you will, the left hand, that's not quite right. Or the rhythm, the pattern. If you type in PASSOORD, for example, or someone going PASS, hang on, it's the right password, but this isn't indicating the rhythms of this person. And that really struck a chord with me to think there must be a lot of, not what you say, but the way you say things, the way you interact with technology might also indicate subconscious leading indicators as well. So I think there's so much that we can go at with technology and generative AI that we can be really predictive, not just proactive, when it comes to well-being and mental health.
Gosh, that's very impressive, isn't it, if you can do that? I just wanted to spool back a moment, because you said there was a phase where you were really quite stressed. You're waking up silly o'clock in the morning and so on. Who did you turn to for support? How did you get through that? Was it something you just dealt with yourself, or did you have an advisor? Was it your wife? What was the support network? Because one of the points of this podcast is to explore with our guests in these major challenges, how do they deal with these big stresses?
Firstly, my wife is and was a great, champion. She's kind of like a life coach to me. So she really believes in the mission and why I do this and the impact it can have on people around the world, but also our family if we do things right. So she was amazing to be able to talk through things. My lead investor, Stuart Hearn, brilliant. He's been through it, so it's nice to be able to lean into that. The one thing that and I'll round this off. Also, I've got a lot of other entrepreneurs, founders on WhatsApp groups and LinkedIn that I've connected with over the years. And so I had a brilliant safety net and support network where I could talk. I'll tell you the one thing that I did find hard is that when you take these individuals, you have a unique relationship with those people. And that can sometimes muddy the waters of how blunt, how honest you can be with them and the feedback they may give you. So, with my wife, obviously we've got the house on the line. We've got a future that we want to build. It's how far do your savings go? How much do I support your vision? And she does endlessly, but when it starts to impact, we can't do that. We can't afford to do that. Maybe we can't have children. Maybe, suddenly does that support change? Naturally, she's a human. Of course it would. You're not going to say, keep doing it. Just run us into the ground. Anything for the business. You wouldn't. With Stuart, brilliant entrepreneur. He was a great boss for me when I was at Clear Review, a brilliant investor now, but he's an investor. How honest do you be with them to be like, I don't know if I can carry on, Stuart? Like, I'm really stressed and I've got tens of thousands of pounds of your hard-earned money in my business, but you understand, right? The confusing dynamic I have found is that I've had a lot of people, but there wasn't necessarily one single objective person that just had no type of investment in me that wouldn't maybe slightly skew the conversations I could have slightly. And even with, I had like periodic coaching, which was really good. But again, coaching was kind of leaning towards action and solution and push forward and what can you do with your mindset. All brilliant things. All of these were amazing tools that I had. But there was still a degree of the raw, honest conversations I had were only with myself. The absolute everything on the table, 4 a.m., heart beating out of my chest, sweating. And this was months. Every single night between 3 and 4, the witching hour, I was up like I had 7 coffees and I could not go to sleep. The idea of the embarrassment, the shame, losing people's money, going under, having to go on LinkedIn and open to work. That still drives me in a negative motivation way, if you will. So it's a long answer, lots of people, but it's still lonely.
Just a small plug for what we do, EFM and MPA. One of the things we do, and obviously we've met through professional relationship,
yes.
Is that we support entrepreneurs like yourself because we are that objective person. We're not shareholders, we're not directors, we're not employees, not staff members, we're not friends, we're not family. But what we are is usually fairly experienced, i.e. older, wizened, if you like, and we're able to be honest, not in a cruel sense, but we're able to support. And that's one of the things that we do between our businesses, to support entrepreneurs like yourself to scale these hurdles as they appear. And it's good to have somebody who will say to you, well, I'm not sure that's a good idea, or have you thought of this, whatever it is, or I know somebody who can help you with that. And it's an important part of running a business, is knowing that whatever the safety net is, and whether it's 1 people or 10 different people, that there are people you can call on, and we do that a lot, as part of the service we provide.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I can definitely see as an entrepreneur the genuine need for something like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think especially having the experience of seeing so many companies go through fairly similar journeys, because I think especially for first-time founders, it may just be a question of like, is this normal? Like, should I just stop here, or should I keep going?
That's true. You don't know the bends in the road that are coming up, right?
No.
And more experienced, wizened professionals. I totally agree that we've been down this road. Sean, look, sounds like you're selling to a very small percentage of innovators here. Maybe you should, before you jump into this, maybe try to have more conversations with laggards or late majority adopters, rather than just run with, this is great, it's a false positive effectively. So absolutely, I totally understand the need for that.
Yeah. Well, you've been a great guest. It's been really interesting to hear.
Thank you so much.
Excuse me. It's been really interesting to hear about Minddate and what it's doing, and really good luck with your venture.
Thank you.
Particularly the next funding round.
Yes.
It always creates its own dynamic. But,
absolutely, yeah.
But hopefully you'll be well supported on that in all senses as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed this. So it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.